You're listening to Boomers Today with your host, Frank Sampson.
Well, welcome to Boomers Today. I'm your host, Frank Sampson. Of course, each week we bring you important and very useful information on issues facing baby boomers, their parents, and other loved ones. And I can't thank all of you enough for all your support. Our listeners grow organically each and every day, and it's because of you, sharing particular podcasts or our entire show with friends and family. And I know many of you listen to the show on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, iHeartRadio. Now we're on pretty much, we're on them all. Or many of you go to our website at boomerstodayradio.com. So again, thank you so much for all your support. I know why we're getting more and more listeners, because we have great guests and great information. I'm not going to disappoint you today. We have with us Josh Sapan, who is the former President and Chief Executive Officer of AMC Networks, where since 1987, he oversaw the creation and growth of entertainment brands, including AMC, BBC, America, IFC, and SundanceTV, and signature series including Mad Men, Breaking Bad, The Walking Dead, and Killing Eve. Sapan also oversaw the creation of the film production and distribution company IFC Films, as well as AMC Studios and AMC Networks International. Now, after 35 years with AMC Networks, 25 as CEO and currently Executive Vice Chairman, Sapan is embarking on a third act of his own, one sure to entail moves in more creative avenues. Josh has authored his new book called The Third Act, Reinventing Your Next Chapter. Josh, thank you so much for joining us on Boomers Today. I really appreciate it.
Hey, Frank, thanks so much for having me, and thanks for your very kind introduction.
Yeah, no, it's pretty exciting to have you on. I'm of that age group too, that, we're friends that are retiring or thinking about retiring and going, I don't know, I'm not retiring. I don't know what I'm going to do with myself, all of that. And so you kind of have been working on an inspiring new trend away from maybe traditional retirement, in favor of maybe pursuing new careers and fulfilling, certain passions. So, we're going to talk about your book in a little bit, but I just love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, it also ties together. You mentioned what people are doing who are nearing or at retirement age, and what caused me to want to write the book, and I began several years ago, was my observation of friends and colleagues as they reached the time when, in the media business, particularly where I knew them professionally, they were sort of ending their careers. And I observed some having really a happy and dynamic third act, and some being, frankly, a little bewildered about what to do with themselves. And in most cases, they had the privilege of not needing to, actively bring in income urgently. And it became of interest to me for selfish reasons, because I said, what will I do in 4 years or so? And I didn't make a study of it, but I observed what people did, and then came upon what, I don't know if there's a proper phrase for it, but people who did things that were dynamic after they did what they did. And hence the term third act, and hence the book. And I observed that people took many avenues, many of them inspiring.
That's great. So you mind talking about yourself and have you're kind of experiencing that yourself in that third act?
Yeah, well, that's the funny part of, or the odd timing is, though I began this because book writing, at least for me, takes years. It was prospective. It was sort of long in the future, and then the timing worked such that the book, I guess, was published just a few weeks ago, and my final exit from AMC Networks as Executive Vice Chair will be December 31st, and from when we're speaking right now, several days. So the timing is coincidental in its specific, but not in general. And so the odd thing that occurs to me is, what am I doing about my own third act? Well, I wrote a book about what to do. which doesn't quite solve the issue.
Right.
But I have begun to undertake a number of activities, I guess not any one, Frank, that I think are worthy and important to me, with a little bit more liberty in my schedule. And so I will make independent films, which are near and dear to my heart. They were part of my career. I have an arrangement to do that, and set up a small company to do it. And then I'd never really volunteered. And I began thinking, oh, gee, I'll volunteer driving an ambulance. And I could drive the ambulance, but I couldn't operate 3 radios that was required to do at the same time. The tech was well beyond me. And then, as a friend said, you'll be the only person driving an ambulance who says, can you keep it quiet back there? I'm taking a phone call. So, I thought maybe that's not for me. And I began to volunteer at this wonderful place called the Fortune Society in the New York area, which friends told me about, and I was not that aware of. And it's set up, it's been in existence for decades, and it helps people who've been imprisoned and are recently released adjust to not being in prison. And part of that is that they provide residential facilities for a time. And I've been doing, I guess, what could be called career coaching. And that's a new experience for me. And it's been, I hope, good for some of the people who I've been spending time with. But it's been, I know it sounds trite, but very rewarding for me to be with people who I wouldn't otherwise be around, and socializing with and hanging out with and trying to provide some bit of guidance for.
Yeah. So what advice do you have for those that are listening to this and they may be moving into that next phase of their life, as we call the third act? What advice do you have? I mean, I have known people who just are they're just burnt out. They don't enjoy getting up and doing their work anymore, and they just can't wait for that day. And they just really didn't have a plan. And then they stopped working, and they were, having a great time for a while. And then, the whole boredom set in, and that's not good either. So, I mean, just what advice do you have for someone who's approaching that period of time in their life?
Well, I really should say that, we had spoken, and the foreword of the book is written by someone who's an expert and could answer the question you just asked with true authority. His name is Ken Dykewald, and he's written 18 books on the subject and had PBS specials, and he is a true expert. So my advice, I should caveat it, is the advice of a lay person with no real training or authority, and is undergoing it myself. So just call it the guy who's sitting next to you on the bench. And what I think I've observed and found true for myself is that wandering around is not agreeable to me, and free time, meaning, oh gee, I got nothing, how good is that, is not up my alley. And that there are a number of things that I've been curious about, and or in some cases passionate about, that I began to experiment with and found them in this early stage surprisingly rewarding. So I guess if I were to give counsel, it might be to think about, and then not think too long, just begin to try, maybe with one's toe, if one has an inclination to do volunteer here or try that or start a new business or do that, to give it a whirl. That would be my best counsel, would be to do that, to act on it.
Right. And, we spoke a little bit before we started this podcast. And as you know, I'm in the senior care business and do a lot of work with families with dementia and all that. And there's all sorts of statistics is to keep that mind sharp, is to do things that don't come as easy, and those you're going to have to work at it and make that mind work. And, I know that I could tell you when it comes time for me, I'm not ready for it yet, but when I'm able to take it a little slower, I want to learn. I don't play an instrument.
Hmm.
I never learned an instrument growing up. I think my parents wanted me to, but I was a jock and I, go play sports instead of doing that. But now I kind of wish I did. And, learning, I have a friend of mine who was retired and went to Spain to learn Spanish, and he's almost 80 years old, and
Wow.
I
Wow.
thought it was fantastic. I thought it was
Fantastic.
fantastic. So I mean, I'm just throwing things out that do,
Yeah, yeah.
but it's doing,
Well, I'll
maybe doing
mention.
things you're not that as comfortable with. Don't do necessarily the exact same things you've done your entire life because you know how to do all that. Try
Yeah,
something else.
I'm. Yeah, I think that's right. Well, I'll mention a few people in the book because we did do
Yeah,
research
right, right.
on people whose stories I found remarkable, and uh, this is not, of course, for people who are compromised in any way, but there are three who just did different gigs. There's a woman who worked in corporate America but always wanted to travel, and at age mid-50s, she became a flight attendant. That's a career change. There's another person, a woman, who also a corporate-ish type job and actually had been in a fire as a kid. It never left her, and she became a firefighter. And then a guy who was another type, corporate type, and he became a park ranger. And then another guy who's at 70, he worked in IT and he loved music and he became a DJ, and he's extraordinarily successful and has a big following in Brooklyn among 20 somethings. So, and they all discovered it a bit. I think, well, they had intention, but like the DJ, he didn't know how it would work. It just took on a head of steam. So those are people who just had, you might call them fantasy career or job aspirations. There are other people in the book. I just love their stories. A woman who worked at a telephone company, a wireless company, and she's from the Bronx, and there was a big article on her, opened the Bronx Children's Museum here in New York in a neighborhood that could well use a children's museum. And she used her skills gained in her professional career to do something I think that was more rewarding than anything she's ever done. So those are just a few of the people who I think are interesting and slightly inspiring. And I can go on, but I don't want to burn up your time or anyone's
Oh no, that's
time
very,
too much
very interesting.
listening.
What I'm curious about is how'd you find these, the various people? I mean, you come from the entertainment industry, and I'm sure you maybe. I'm making an assumption here. I haven't read your book. I look forward to reading it, so I'll admit I haven't read it yet. But the so maybe you've interviewed people within the entertainment field, people you've had contacts with. But how did you get out? How did you reach the people who maybe you didn't have any previous contacts with in your past?
Yeah, so I was able to get people who are no household names like Robert Redford and Norman Lear, because I knew them through my work, and they are, by the way, shining examples because Robert Redford was a painter initially early in his life, and then an actor, and then the first movie he directed was Ordinary People, and then became a very early environmentalist. And Norman Lear just turned 100 and is still wildly active, both in social justice movements, which he created, something called People for the American Way, and still in television. So I had access to those people. The ones that the ones that I didn't know, we did research. I hired a young woman to help me, a friend of my daughter, and she's a school teacher, and we together looked for stories, some of which I came across, many of which she did. There's a guy who there had been an article on him somewhere, or media coverage, I think on a podcast actually. His name is Carl Butts, and he. So part of it was media coverage. He had lost his wife, somewhat surprisingly, I think near the bit early part of the retirement, and was bereft. And he purchased the smallest circulation newspaper in America, and now he's not William Randolph Hearst, but he's a publisher. And so I found them through research is the short answer.
Yeah, that's great. Very, very interesting. So, Josh, we're going to take a real quick break, I promise, just about 30 seconds here, just to recognize our sponsor. When we come back, I want to learn, let people know how they could get, your book, and talk a little bit more about that, and just maybe some interesting stories we'll talk about when we come back. Okay. So do you know anybody who may be concerned about an older driver? Well, Senior Care Authority's Beyond Driving with Dignity program is a facilitated self-assessment program for older drivers. This program has been designed to serve as a vital tool to facilitate older drivers and their families as they make the appropriate decision regarding the future of one's safe driving career. If the individual is a safe driver, an advisor will provide him or her with strategies on how to remain a safe driver as they progress through the aging process. If driving retirement is the appropriate decision, then the individual and their family are offered possible alternatives, resources, and a specific plan to ensure a smooth and successful transition from the driver's seat to the passenger seat. So to learn more, go to www.beyonddrivingwithdignity.com, or you could call 877-907-8841 to connect with a Senior Care Authority advisor in your area. We're back with Josh Sapan, who is the former president and chief executive officer of AMC Networks, and has also written a book called The Third Act, Reinventing Your Next Chapter. So, Josh, why don't you just commercial time for you? Tell people how they could get your book. I think it's great.
Oh, sure.
I'm going to go out and get it. So I look forward to reading it, but go ahead. Tell people how they could get it, and anything else you'd like to share.
Oh, sure. Well, thank you for asking. So it's published by Princeton Architectural Press, and it's available on their website, and it is available on Amazon, and it is in many bookstores across the country. Barnes and Noble just reordered it, I happen to notice, and so it's in Barnes and Noble stores, and it's in many, but not all, independent bookstores across the country. And it is, as you mentioned, the name of it is Third Act, and my name is Josh, Sapan, and that will be the information one needs to identify the book. So that's the commercial.
Great. And you're for those that are listening, you're open to maybe speaking engagements and things like that as well. And how would they be able to reach you, and what would be the best way to reach you if they were interested in talking to you about that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm new to all this after, as you mentioned in the opening, my 36 years at the same company, and then 48 in working in media. And my email address is joshsapan@gmail.com. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty straightforward.
Great.
And usually I can't close my mouth, so I'm quite open to finding any legitimate place to keep it open.
Great. So in your research and talking to so many people, do you feel, and just your experience in maybe dealing with your own family's situation, or just what retirement used to be, with our parents and grandparents, and versus what retirement is going to look like in the month, in the years ahead? Is there a huge difference? Have you noticed a big difference with that?
Well, again, I really would not false humility. I'm really not a gerontologist or an expert, but there are a few things I think that you probably know well. The but for a couple of anomalies recently, the average life expectancy has been increasing in America on a steady basis, but for these anomalies of the last few years, unfortunately, COVID and pain medications, but for those which are causing, of course, life expectancy has been increasing dramatically, really over the past decades by 20 years. So people are living longer, and healthcare is better. And depending upon one's means, that the conclusion is, I think, that for many, many people, and there will be over 70 million people of an age where they're not, hopefully, only sitting in front of a TV after their careers, they can do a zillion different things, an hour a day, 10 hours a day, 50 hours a week, and that's a cool thing. They'll have their bodies and their minds, and even if they're not cooperating entirely, they're still immensely capable of thrilling themselves and, helping others and having great new sorts of adventures. And so I think it is a phenomenon of our time, apart from me, apart from the book. And so it's something to, I think, behold.
Right. So the people that you interviewed in your book, if you don't mind, I want you to give it all away. We want people to go out and get the book, but
no, it's fine.
Is there maybe a couple people that just really inspired you and it just kind of blew you away, and kind of what they're doing, and anything that you could share for?
Yeah,
for our
there's
listeners?
really, there's almost too many to name. There's a woman named Ida Keeling who ran a marathon at 100 years of age after having a whole series of challenges in her life. There is a guy who was, he was a Black Panther early in his life. He was in prison. He got advanced degrees, and he has acting. He's an acting teacher. There was an NBA ref. You said you were a jock, who was, he was sort of a tough NBA ref, and he went into the clergy. So, I just find them all, honestly, those and so many more. I don't want to ramble on too long. Awesome, in a word. A guy who was a telephone repairman and became a shoe designer. And sort of my jaw drops at that when I think that living within a human who can be identified by what they do is a whole other human, a whole other life, and a whole other set of dreams and capabilities that then become manifest. And it feels to me, almost as magical as the magic one sees on a movie screen when someone transforms. And I just find it a thing to behold and wonderful. And I think it's resident in really millions or tens of millions of Americans, that possibility. And it's quite exciting to contemplate it.
I was with a buddy of mine. We were watching a football game. He's an attorney, and we're watching the game, and he says, "See that ref right there, on TV?" And I said, "Yeah, I see the ref." He says, I know him. He's a big attorney. I went, "What?"
Really? Is that right?
Yeah. He's a big attorney, always was interested in football. He used to play football, and he decided he still is practicing, but his plan is, once he retires, he's going to be, and he's, I guess, just works weekends as a professional football ref. Just blew me away.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy.
That's actually sort of mind blowing.
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's a lot of crazy stories. I mean, not crazy. I think it's wonderful. I think it's wonderful.
There's a guy in the book. It's a multi-part story. There's many chapters, but he is, if I have it straight, a bankruptcy attorney and also a lifeguard on the beach in his mid-late 60s. And there's a great second chapter because I hope I have this straight, in order to re-qualify for being a lifeguard, they required that he take the test in a Speedo bathing suit. And he litigated because he didn't want to take the test in a Speedo. And he won the litigation. So he's not only bankruptcy attorney, lifeguard in his mid or late 60s, he's also using the courts to create a version of what he sees as justice in the lifeguard system.
Yeah, it's wild. Wow. We just have a couple minutes left. Maybe, just because of your background, your field that you've been in for your entire career has changed dramatically, right? I mean, there's a lot of changes going on with, just with streaming and all that.
Sure.
If you want, if you don't, I'm fine. But any insight onto where you see things going with all the, streaming? Is it a good thing? Is it not a good thing for the industry?
Well, there's a multi-part answer as it relates to the business of it. But one impact of it, which I think most people observe, is that when you and I were growing up, my mother would try and get me not to watch television because she thought she would say, quote, "I'm going to throw that idiot box out the window."
Right.
And
right.
that was a refrain I heard a lot. And I certainly think that today, when one goes to streaming services, all of which we know the names of, one can find storytelling and television series and limited series and movies that are they're on the spectrum from truly high art almost to wonderful and to work that is as good as I think the greatest writers living can put into novels and maybe in some cases have ever written. So I think the proliferation of streaming, the consequence for consumers is killer great stuff to watch on television.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But what effect is that going to have on the traditional movie theaters, you think?
Well, that's a big question, and I'm not sure I know the answer. There's been much discussion and it was confused by COVID about box office receipts and whether movies go straight to streaming or whether they are and or should be released in movies. I happen to be a huge fan of movie theaters. And if there's a movie that I think this is a personal answer, use a fancy word, cinematic, I will go to the movie theater to watch it because I want to see it on the big screen.
I would agree with you. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I just took my grandkids to a movie, and I watch TV with them. But when you go to that movie theater, that big screen and the wonderful sound, it's fantastic. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I'm a monster fan of it. I could go on and on and on. There's a small Italian film called Cinema Paradiso that is about a movie theater that's set up in a small town in Italy, and one hears in that era the sound of the projectors clicking and the lights dim. And today, of course, it's a different experience, but I find it to be something close to rhapsody. And so I've been in the movie theater very recently, actually probably 10 times in the last 10 weeks, which is a lot. I love it.
Yeah, great. Well, Josh, thank you so much for joining us. Hey, everybody, you got to check it out. The third act, Reinventing Your Next Chapter. Josh Sapan, thank you so much for joining us on Boomers today. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and everybody be safe out there. Talk to everybody next week.
You've been listening to Boomers Today with Frank Sampson. To learn more about today's show, visit boomerstodayradio.com and join us next time for another edition of Boomers Today.